Welcome to the KSL Sports Front Page. I'm your host, Ben Anderson, joined today by our BYU insider from KSL Sports, Mitch Harper. Mitch, long history together. Be fun to be doing some broadcasting together again.
We do, Ben. I'm glad you bring that up because we do have a long history that goes back, the last 5-6 years. And good to finally pair up with you here on the front page. We've been doing this now. It feels like about a month and a half, the show, and we haven't teamed up yet. So I'm excited, Ben.
Yeah, this is our third stop together. So fun to be doing this this KSL Sports Front Page. If you're tuning in for the first time, here's what we like to do. We talk about the biggest stories in the state of Utah that are featured on KSLSports.com's front page. And today, Mitch, has just been one of the craziest sports days since all of sports got shut down. I mean, I think that 24 hours was maybe the nuttiest sports day I've ever seen, with basically every professional and amateur sports league getting shut down. Today, locally, might be the busiest that we've seen since then, including, last night, The Last Dance, the kind of ending the Michael Jordan documentary series. And we got a bunch of weird news today.
Yeah, it really has been a newsy day here in the Salt Lake City sports scene. And it's been fun because it kind of felt like, for us, a little bit of normalcy again to see things trickling in and have news coming through that we need to create for viewers and listeners and readers out there, because it feels like the past few months we've had these little tidbits and nuggets, but nothing that's really been significant news. And today has been definitely a return to getting to those newsy items.
So, Mitch, one of the big stories today that popped up, and actually this came out yesterday during this NBA Inside Stuff gathering of NBA legends, which I thought was actually a really cool idea. First of all, we forget how important Ahmad Rashad was. That Ahmad Rashad was the NBA insider for a really long time. He was the one guy who kind of had access to all the players behind the scenes. And Saturday mornings, you would tune in and catch Ahmad Rashad. But this story written yesterday by Trevor Allen, kind of just talking about what's going on with the Jazz currently, including Karl Malone, John Stockton, and of course, Hall of Fame head coach Jerry Sloan, who we know is dealing with Lewy body dementia. And unfortunately, Karl asked the rest of the players, as he's been talking to John, that it just doesn't sound like Sloan's doing very well. And he kind of asked them to extend their thoughts and their prayers to Coach Sloan. Yeah,
I really hope, Coach Sloan, doing well. I mean, it's crazy to have that come out during just moments before the last few episodes of The Last Dance, because we saw Coach Sloan at the podium after that 96-54 game. And he's like, was that the actual score? I mean, the guy was just a legend. And, he's, health wise, he has not been in a good place for some time now. And, you hope that everything's okay for his family and wife. And you just feel for him because he's a legend. I mean, you talk about the greatest coaches in this state, and there's been some really good ones, but Jerry Sloan might be near the top. Him and like Lavelle Edwards, those are some of the greatest to ever do it here out of the state of Utah, and you hope nothing but the best for the Sloan family.
Yep, I couldn't agree with you more. So cool story there yesterday with the Inside Stuff. Of course, the sad part of it with Jerry Sloan, but I think you're right. It was good timing with The Last Dance, and you get to see Jerry's humility, which was one of the things that, as much as he kind of had this Marlboro man, hardened attitude, I know that's what Kyle Korver had compared him to. He really did have great humility when he was a basketball coach. So that was cool to see some of that through this Last Dance documentary series. The other big news today, which really caught me off guard, even though I think there were some instances of it throughout the season, Mitch, was Boyan Bogdanovich undergoing season-ending wrist surgery. Adrian Wojnarowski reported this. I know the Jazz have actually since confirmed it. And some of the people I've talked to, it sounds like Boyan's going to have surgery tomorrow in New York City. There's no timetable officially for his return, though Adrian Wojnarowski said the Jazz expect Boyan Bogdanovich to be back by the beginning of the 2020-2021 season.
Yeah, and I kind of wonder, Ben, like, why did he wait this long to have this season-ending surgery? Is kind of was my first thought when I saw this news. But this potentially has, I think, a huge impact when the season does return, because all signs point to sports returning in the near future. We'll get to that a little bit later, but this has a huge impact on the Jazz potential to make a run in the NBA playoffs. However the playoffs end up looking, that's going to take a severe blow to the Jazz chances of maybe making a run and getting to the title.
Yeah, so Woj reported that it happened in the January 20th game against the Indiana Pacers. Some of the people I talked to said that that isn't the case. It actually happened much earlier in the season, and he's been playing with it throughout then. He did re-injure it a couple of times. You saw a fall he took in New Orleans. You saw a fall he took against Indiana where it looks like he re-hurt it, and then met with some specialists. Clearly it's been bothering him, and they suggested it was something he had to get done. And what I would think, Mitch, is that the Jazz decided, you know what, if the season comes back, yes, we'd love to have you, but we're going to have an abbreviated offseason this year now, because if the season comes back, you're probably playing until Labor Day, and then maybe you only get a couple of months off before a December start to the 2020-2021 season. And what they decided to do is, hey, let's just bite the bullet now. We'll lose Boyan for the rest of this season, even if it does come back, but make sure he's 100% ready to go for next year. Because I do think one of the underrated stories about this Jazz team, one that hasn't been talked about enough, is that this was really a 2-year build. You know, you signed Mike Conley for 2 seasons, assuming he picks up his player option. You gave Boyan this long-term contract. This wasn't a one-and-done season for the Jazz, Mitch. I think they really kind of said, let's work out our kinks in season 1 and let's make a real run for a championship in year 2. And I still think that's the plan.
Yeah, and I think Boyan was honestly fantastic. I mean, best offseason acquisition. I think everyone thought Conley was going to be just instant plug and play, and the Jazz were going to be off and run with him. But obviously, that's been a little bit tougher than expected. But Boyan, I think offensively, especially, it's been nothing short of great. I mean, the game winner against the Bucks, in Houston as well.
Right.
And defensively, though, I think at times it felt like there was a little bit of disjointedness. It felt like, if that's, it just felt like defensively he wasn't maybe in sync with the rest of the Jazz, because it felt like the past few years we've always known the Jazz to be this defensive team, and now they've been more of an offensive squad, and Boyan kind of highlights that. But I think he's, for the value they got him at, a 4-year deal, and it's really a bargain compared to other contracts out there in the NBA. He's a heck of a player that's averaging 20 points a game and win shares about 4.3. So yeah, Boyan, I thought year 1, I thought he was pretty solid, really good for the Jazz this season.
Yeah, he was one of the few A's I gave to the Jazz in my year-end season review. I kind of graded all the players, and Boyan was certainly an A this season. I think you're right, one of the best off-season acquisitions the Jazz really ever had, going back to Carlos Boozer, Mehmet Okur. I think he's certainly in that conversation as one of the best the Jazz have ever had. Following up, another loss the Jazz had today, which was very surprising. A guy who I feel like I actually know pretty well personally, Walt Perrin, who's been the longtime Utah Jazz VP of player personnel. He oversees all the Jazz scouting. Huge congrats to Walt Perrin. He just got a huge job, Mitch. He's going to be the assistant general manager of this new look Knicks front office, which has been totally retooled really since February.
Yeah, I think that's a good move for him, but I think it's a somewhat of a significant loss for the Jazz. I mean, you're talking about someone with 19 years experience, and I think one of the biggest strengths, I think, and from my viewpoint as an outsider looking in, felt like the guy just, he knew how to get good players, but also players that were willing and wanted to live in Salt Lake City, because I think that's a big piece to the puzzle when you're talking about finding draft prospects and getting guys that actually want to live in Salt Lake. Donovan Mitchell being a great example of that. I remember many times leading up to the draft, in your extensive draft coverage, you talked about Donovan being willing to live in Salt Lake. So I think Walt Perrin had a good sense of that. But I also think, too, just of all the summers on KSL 5 TV, he would be on Sports Beat. I mean, he was kind of the face of the Jazz when it was draft season. You always heard from Walt Perrin the last 2 decades, and it's going to be kind of sad not seeing him around.
Yeah, Walt's been certainly one of the personalities of the Jazz. As this front office has gotten, I think, a little bit more removed from the media, Walt's still been one of those guys who's always been willing to jump on, or he's come in studio with Jeremiah Jensen several times to talk about draft prospects. So Walt's going to be a loss for the Jazz. His extensive knowledge and relationships that he has in the college game, I think, are probably going to be the biggest loss that the Jazz end up suffering. My understanding, Mitch, is that he kind of had an old school approach to scouting. And if we know anything about Dennis Lindsay and Justin Zanuck, they're not old school. They want to be as progressive as you can be with the numbers, with how they're scouting players. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what the Jazz do to replace Walt Perrin and who they dial up to step in. I would imagine it'll be somebody younger. I'd imagine it's somebody who's maybe a little bit more on the digital forefront of scouting and how this is done. But I still think there's huge value to guys like what Walt Perrin do, who just kind of have the handshake personality and that relationship with college coaches around, where they get an opportunity to go in and talk to coaches. They get to go in and sit in on uncertain practices. And sometimes I'm sure those are, not totally sanctioned by the NCAA, but when you're kind of a guy who's been around and they know you, you can probably get into some places that not everyone can get into. So Walt certainly brought value to the Jazz. I do think as they replace him, they'll try and find a way to use it to make further progress going forward. But really cool for Walt and really cool for the Knicks to get Walt. I mean, you don't get more high profile than working for the Knicks when it comes to the NBA.
Do you think it's an in-house promotion they possibly do, the Jazz, to fill this role, or do you think they go somewhere outside to bring some new face with new perspective?
There certainly could be a scout that they already have on the roster, on their scouting team roster, I should say, that they would choose to bring in because, they have international scouts. They've got guys who have obviously been working closely with Walt Perrin for some time that they could use there and bring somebody in. But like I said, I mean, I think the Jazz don't waste opportunities to get better. Certainly Dennis Lindsey doesn't, Justin Zanuck doesn't. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if they don't go make a big push for somebody to come in and take over that job. And look, that's a huge job. I mean, you're a legit NBA executive at that point. Like we've said, he's been with the Jazz since 2008. So to hold on to him for that long is it's good stability. And that's why people like to join the Jazz. So we'll see which direction the Jazz head there. Could definitely go in-house, but they could try and do something, way outside of the box, Mitch, and try and get somebody who's maybe more of a digital guy in general, and less of just kind of the handshake guy who takes a totally different approach to scouting that the Jazz think they could use to find that advantage. Another big story today, Mitch, that I think is actually maybe going to have the biggest impact that we see anywhere in the world of sports is that California, Texas, and New York are all saying that they think there's going to be opportunities for them to host pro sporting games without fans beginning June 1st. To get another article written here by Trevor Allen. We know last week this was the big discussion around the Pac-12 is if the state was going to be closed down or all the campuses were going to be closed down, how are we going to get college football games played? And that would basically eliminate most of the Mountain West Conference and most of the Pac-12.
Yeah, I think this is pretty significant news to see that California is willing to allow this to happen. Now, I still kind of wonder what it will mean for college sports down the road, because it's been a little bit disconnected with college sports, because we've seen some commissioners of conferences say, hey, we won't play unless there's students on campus. Others have said we'll play if there's only online classes. But for pro sports, it's great because it feels like recently this COVID-19 pandemic, we've kind of seen a lot of states take political stance. We don't want to get into politics here, but they kind of align with maybe their political views.
Right.
Whereas now it feels like, hey, everyone's starting to get on the same page of letting sports come back, because sports is a big driver of the economy, and it can bring back some normalcy and give something for people to look forward to again. And honestly, I think that the no fan element it's just fine. I mean, sports to me are made for television anyway. I hope that us in the media, we get chances to cover these events, but ultimately these are kind of made for TV spectacles. And as long as they're on television, I don't think the fans would complain at all. I mean, it'd be weird. Sure. Guys like LeBron have even said that they would maybe be against, playing in an empty arena, but it's better than having no games at all. So I want to see a resolution to this NBA season. I want to see, NHL, all of it get resolved and not have these open-ended, shortened seasons. I want to see some resolution. So I'm excited. I think this is great that California and New York especially are being willing to bring sports back coming up in June.
Yeah, Mitch, and I think you're totally right. I mean, not to get into the political aspect of it, as you mentioned, though, but Gavin Newsom's super liberal, Cuomo's very liberal, and then, of course, Abbott in Texas is extremely conservative. So to get people on both sides of the aisle kind of agreeing that we can bring this back, it either says one of two things. Either we're really in a good shape to do this, or there's so much money being lost right now that you have to have those pro teams back. And you know what? As a sports fan, it's good for us. Either way, whichever is the driver is a really good sign for us. It's going to be a fun thing to watch.
Well, and I think too with the NBA, I mean, you would know this better than me, but I mean, just that money from the TV contract, if they don't fulfill the season, I mean, what's the money? I mean, it's a ton of money that would be lost for the NBA that would have, I would imagine, impacts years from now and salaries and everything that goes into it. So yeah, there's a ton of money involved. We're talking billions. And sports, it's huge for the economies, and I think for people to look forward to. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't have that fan in the stands aspect, but as long as it's on TV, I think that's all we can really ask for at this point, and kind of as we get closer to that new normal.
Yeah, in the in the NBA, I should say, it's potentially $1 billion they could foresee losing if they canceled the rest of this season. So they want to get back and make that money, and that's about 20% of their income every year. So that would be an absolutely enormous loss. You had a good article that came out last week. It really came out, what was it, Saturday over the weekend? Yep. Tom Homo discussing where there had been some question, I guess, if whether or not BYU was preparing to come back, which seemed a little preposterous that they weren't doing something that every other school in the country is doing. But you wrote up your article here that BYU is, of course, planning to be ready to go whenever sports can come back.
Yeah, Tom Homo and he had an Instagram video called "Walking with Tom." We don't get to hear from Tom Homo very much in the media. He kind of does his own things. That's fine. We heard him speak about maybe BYU's stance on the upcoming season. He made it clear that he doesn't know when things are going to return, but he did say that BYU will be willing to play. And I must say that, independence, there's been a lot of talk about, what if BYU ends up having to play a schedule filled with just independent teams? That would be honestly terrible for BYU. I think for fans out there that love BYU football, I would hate to watch that and cover that. But I will say one of the positives to being an independent is that you're not at the mercy of a conference like Utah, even though they're in a state where I think we've done a really good job with navigating the coronavirus pandemic. They're kind of at the mercy of maybe California and Larry Scott, the commissioner, to make the call. Whereas BYU, it's their own institution. They're going to determine how things seem fit for them. And it could open opportunities for them in terms of scheduling if the Pac-12 does go their own way, maybe play spring or whatever they end up doing, or if they play as scheduled. But it could open opportunities for BYU as far as scheduling is concerned. So, yeah, I think it was just good for BYU to make it clear that, hey, we are going to play. We will be ready. And honestly, that's the perspective that I think everyone wanted to hear.
I think you're right. You wrote an article last week talking about how, there's kind of a need for a single commissioner in all of college football to help unite the 5 different Power 5 commissioners. And then, of course, the group of 6 beyond that. BYU's kind of in that spot where they get to be their own commissioners. They kind of get to have that own opportunity. They have true autonomy in college football when it comes to being an independent school. And this is one of those weird regions where maybe they can find that opportunity to really take advantage of that.
Yeah, it's a niche that BYU has filled kind of nicely, where they're on their own silo of sorts in college football, and no one really knows if they're Group of 5 or Power 5, but they're kind of in that in between range. And BYU has got that luxury to form their own schedule and fill opportunities if things open up, where they could step right in and play games if needed. If we see some changes, maybe with this pandemic impacting potentially the schedule in college football.
All right, Mitch, one more fun story before we wrap this up. Community star Joel Mchale, if people don't realize, he played high school basketball. Actually, did he play really low-level college basketball as well? I think he ended up playing some junior college ball, but he spent time playing with BYU's head coach, Mark Pope.
Yeah, a pretty crazy story. Joel Mchale on his podcast with Ken Jeong, the comedian from most commonly known for probably like The Hangover and also Community TV show.
Yep.
Joel Mchale talked about, they were talking about The Last Dance, and then went into what it was like going up playing against a future NBA player. And he talked about going up against Mark Pope and how you just knew he was an NBA talent. He was clearly better than everyone on the court. I think that just kind of gives perspective to just how good NBA players are, because really Mark Pope in the NBA, and he'll even tell you this, he was probably one of the worst players in the NBA, but at high school and college, he was one of the best around. So it just speaks to the talent that it takes for athletes to get into the NBA. But Joel Mchale went on to say that seeing Mark Pope up close and in person in high school made him realize he needs to get better on his jokes, because comedy is going to have to be the route for him, not basketball, if he wants to go to the NBA.
Hey, Mercer Island's a pretty good high school, though, to play. You know who else played there? Jazz coach Quinn Snyder.
That's right. Wow. Good. That's good pull.
Yeah, Quinn Snyder played at Mercer before he ended up going to Duke as, one of the top recruits in the country as well. So Washington high school basketball is very legit. Yeah, no surprise that Mark Pope was such a huge recruit. And it says a lot about Mchale's his playing days as well. He must have been better than he gives himself credit for. But he's done pretty well on the Soup and Community, which are both very funny.
Yeah.
All right, go find all those stories at KSL. Sorry, Mitch, go ahead.
I was saying, always that's been the fun part of the pandemic, is finding these type of stories. Because in a normal season, probably not typing up about Joel Mchale, but in a pandemic, we're adjusting, we're evolving. That's what we're doing here on the front page as well.
Go to KSLSports.com. Make sure you bookmark it in that top right-hand corner. We're getting a ton of traffic today. We appreciate everybody who's tuning in, not just to this, but who goes and reads KSLSports.com. Make sure to follow BYU Insider Mitch Harper on Twitter at Mitch_Harper. You can find me on Twitter at Ben's Hoops. Huge thanks to the University Federal Credit Union as well, who makes the front page possible. Make sure and check out the KSL Sports Front Page every Wednesday, or I should say Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We try and do this at 4 o'clock every other day throughout the week. So really a fun opportunity if you can tune in. It's fun to jump on and be able to talk to you guys when we get that opportunity. Otherwise, we appreciate you jumping on with us and tuning in. Mitch, thanks for doing this.
Hey, thanks, Ben.
Check back with us on Wednesday for the KSL Sports Front Page.